helping consumers that are struggling with interfacing with the complex system we have here.
Actually, Alex, I'm going to ask you one quick follow-up that occurred to me. Are there particular areas that you think are overhyped or saturated that you would avoid?
It's a good question. I think right now what we've seen over the last few years on the lending side, I think it's a tough time to be building new lending businesses. Doesn't mean it's impossible. I just saw one the other day. I think that's really interesting. But pure lending businesses are ones where I think it's sort of, at least in the United States, maybe not the best time to be making new investments in new companies there. And then, I'd say a little bit on robo-advisory, just, pure robo-advisory businesses. There's already a bunch that are at scale. Cost of acquisition has been high. So I think those are two that I would say. And then maybe, payments infrastructure companies. We've seen some of the early winners there, like Square and Stripe, get to scale. And I think that's a hard place to be building a new business right now.
Really interesting, thank you. So Kristen, come back to you. So you represent, as you said, a new trade association in the blockchain space. And certainly that's an area where there's been a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of money flowing into the space. So tell us a little bit more as to why there's so much enthusiasm, and who are some of your members? I mean, what is it they're trying to do, and how many of them are actually doing it today? I asked you like 15 questions in one.
I'll see if I can get to all of them. So, as I mentioned, the Blockchain Association is a relatively new trade association, and here in the United States, or in our First Amendment to the Constitution, you have the right to petition the government, and it's very common for any regulated industry to band together, and it serves a couple functions, because it allows for the industry kind of on the front end to figure out what they want, and then have sort of a unified front, so that we don't all knock on Daniel Gorfein's door asking for help and advice on different issues. We can do it, as a group, and it makes it a little bit more efficient and allows for discussion to take place. So, I really actually believe, none of my members have told me this, but the group came together over the summer because they felt that there was a need to have advocacy in this space, and I believe it all started when Mark Zuckerberg testified before the U.S. Senate, and the senators were asking very basic questions as to how it worked, and they realized, oh my goodness, there are a lot of policymakers out there that don't know our industry and how it works. So, the CFTC is not an example of one of those. It's an example of, thanks to Daniel and his work, of an agency that is very, has their ears to the ground and very, very open. But there are other branches of government, such as the legislative branch, that need some help. So we're here to serve as an organizing force in that space. And there are a couple of really existential issues to our industry that you mentioned a little bit earlier. One of those is figuring out, we have these tokens that are out there, and some of them function as replacements for securities. Some of them are not. They're clearly commodities like Bitcoin, but there are other ones that are sort of in the middle that we hope will have function, but at what point are they functional enough and decentralized enough that they don't fall under the U.S. securities framework? So that's probably an important issue for us. There's also a lot of tax issues in this space that we're working to address. But I think what's exciting for our members, and why there is excitement in this space, is that blockchain technology and the open public blockchains have the potential it's allowing us to reimagine how we do financial services, and it's also allowing us to reimagine how we conduct business and relationships on the internet. There are so many distributed web applications that are doing really interesting, or planning to do really interesting things in this space. I think one of the biggest challenges we have with working with some regulators and with Congress is that outside of the digital money use case, which we've seen quite a bit of, most of these projects, these really big ones that have the potential to be have a large impact aren't complete yet. They're still under development. They're still being worked on, and it's hard to go make the case as to why you need changes for something that doesn't exist yet. But it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg, because these things can't exist if we don't get the policy changes we need. So that's the challenge that we're working with, and it will definitely keep us busy for the next couple of years here.
Excellent, very interesting. So, all right, now I want to shift. We've talked about kind of the market developments and what you guys are all seeing. Let's flip over to the regulatory and policy side. So, Jackson, I'll start with you. You all have done a good amount of research into emerging regulatory models and tools, and I keep coming back to this idea that there are many different types of regulatory tools in the regulator toolkit that you can use to engage with innovation. Can you give us, kind of without us having to read the paper, help us walk through the survey of different types of models you've seen deployed globally? What's worked well? What hasn't worked as well?
Sure. What Daniel is referring to, I believe, is our comment letter to the Global Financial Innovation Network. Now, some of you may have counterparts who are either directly involved or thinking about joining that network. That is a network that is formed by the FCA along with about 10 other regulatory bodies from around the world. We responded to their consultation about 2 weeks ago. In that, there was a 3-page comment letter. The appendix was 55 pages. And within that appendix, we basically documented more than 40 countries who have put together or are thinking about discussing or implementing regulatory sandboxes, but also those that have offered some alternative licensing regimes for fintech firms. As I said earlier, when I first got involved in fintech, when we launched the program in 2014, it was the UK. I think today we have around 60 some odd countries who are involved in some way, shape, or form in fintech and regulating and legislating fintech. So a lot is going on out there, and I call it a pendulum. My colleagues say don't call it that, but regardless, I think what we've seen since 2014 is that it started with the FCA and their approaches, and then you saw it shift east, right? And you saw Singapore, and then as soon as Singapore started, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia were like, well, we can't let them have the gold standard here. We're gonna also kind of create our own fintech ecosystems, and then the pendulum kind of swung back a bit. We've seen a lot of activity in the Middle East. In fact, one of the best fintech races right now exists in the UAE between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And we've seen it even go further now to hit Europe, and with the EU Commission, I believe it was, coming out with their FinTech Action Plan earlier this year, but then also shifting a bit towards South America, in particular Brazil, Mexico, and a few other countries. So that's just kind of a very high level overview of what's happened over the last 4 years in this space. But to talk a little bit more about the paper itself, one of the things that we've seen as we focus on just regulatory sandboxes is that they've gone from really all-encompassing structures where anyone can really come sign up. It's either a cohort system or it's a revolving door or what have you, but anyone can really sign up to this to vertical specific sandboxes now. So some of your counterparts who may be working in insurance, for instance, we've seen a lot of regulatory authorities that focus on insurance create their own vertical sandboxes. And in fact, a couple months ago, Hong Kong came out with 3 sandboxes, one for their securities, the FSC came out with one for the insurance authority, and then one for the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. So three sandboxes for Hong Kong.